he was a pretty ugly, villainous individual on paper and on screen as well, I guess.
In 2015, Chris Hemsworth reportedly lost over $15 million when he invested in a scheme that a fellow actor had assured him would be fruitful. Before and after that, he has had experiences that have shown him that Hollywood is not a place for the weak. From colleagues who stepped on him, deceived him, tarnished his reputation, and even went as far as messing with his family, Chris has been forced to put some actors on his black book. We have all the gist packed for you in this video, and the number 2 actor on this list is someone you'll least expect. Counting down from number 7, Hugh Jackman.
Stressful, or concerning, problematic. It was kind of like being in a therapy session at times, but without the rebuttal of the advice at the end of it. So
Jackman started acting long before Chris embraced the same career path. Young, curious, and ready to excel in acting, he looked forward to support from Jackman, an actor from England who has broken protocols to become renowned internationally. At that point, Chris was convinced that Jackman could be the bridge between struggle and arrival for him. After all, he was the proof that an outsider could conquer Hollywood and still pull others along. But that bridge never appeared. As Chris began circling auditions and small opportunities, the silence from Jackman was loud. In an industry where a single nod from an established name could tilt the scales, Chris felt invisible to someone he believed should have understood his climb better than anyone else. As Chris's career slowly began to learn more about the industry, the lack of support began to feel deliberate rather than accidental. Jackman was everywhere, celebrated for his generosity by other actors, praised for being supportive and uplifting. Yet when it came to Chris, there was distance.
Pushing through that barrier, facing sort of things that scare us and adversity and especially when there's purpose around it, purposeful stress and anxiety.
Chris felt like selective kindness, as if encouragement was a limited resource carefully reserved for others. The issue reportedly became undeniable during a high-profile industry event where both actors were present. Chris had just come off a physically demanding role and was quietly positioning himself for a major franchise opportunity. In a room filled with producers and power brokers, Jackman was said to have acknowledged nearly every rising talent around him, except Chris. The moment was brief, but the impact was permanent. That night, Chris walked away with more than disappointment. He walked away with clarity. From that point on, admiration turned into resentment. Chris stopped expecting support from Jackman and started building walls. The absence of encouragement from someone he once looked up to was heartbreaking. Till date, Chris quietly carries the memory of being left out by Jackman. But his experience with Jackman didn't hurt as much as what happened between him and the next actor. Number 6, Scarlett Johansson.
Occasionally, yeah. It's just a nod. Nothing needs to be said. It's based on appearance. If you speak, you're probably going to ruin that image. So.
At a time, Scarlett was one colleague that Chris held really close to his heart. However, things changed after she casually made a statement during an interview that hinted at Chris being more focused on his physical appearance than on his depth as an actor. Was meant to be lighthearted, a playful jab between co-stars who had spent years sharing sets, press tours, and inside jokes that never made it to the cameras. What Scarlett intended as humor didn't land the way she expected. Within hours, the media stripped the moment of its context and reshaped it into something sharper and more damaging. Headlines reframed her words as criticism. Commentary shows dissected it as an exposed truth. Social media ran with the narrative that Chris was all muscles and vanity, lacking substance beneath the superhero frame. According to Chris, the reaction was jarring. He had spent years fighting to be taken seriously beyond his physique, deliberately choosing challenging roles to escape being boxed in.
Someone that you have to sit between, whereas the villain's allowed to be a little more unpredictable and boundless, and the sort of creative freedom to...
Seeing that struggle reduced to a mocking headline felt like betrayal, especially because it came from someone he trusted. The joke may not have come from malice, but the damage felt personal. Chris felt as though Scarlett's words had given the industry permission to dismiss his effort. To make things more annoying, as the story went viral, Scarlett made no visible attempt to clarify, no effort to shut down the distorted narrative. Whether intentional or not, the absence of correction left Chris feeling exposed and unprotected. That incident caused a major fracture in their relationship, and even though the world moved on to the next headline, Chris carried the lesson with him that in Hollywood, sometimes the deepest wounds come from the people you least expect. But what happens when someone you least expect goes as far as messing with your family? Number 5, Brie Larson.
It was my idea that she could be in the film, and then so I filmed her on my iPhone, reading a bunch of the lines, and then I sent it to Taika and the people at Marvel.
During an interview, Larson was drawn into a conversation that should have ended as harmless industry chatter, but instead ignited one of the most uncomfortable chapters of Chris Hemsworth's Hollywood experience. What surfaced afterward were claims that began circulating loudly that Chris had leaned on his influence to secure an opportunity for his daughter, and that the child herself didn't deserve the attention she was receiving. Whether spoken directly or implied through offhand commentary, the rumor took on a life of its own. Entertainment blogs twisted fragments of conversation into certainty. Online commentators repeated the narrative as if it were confirmed truth, and somehow, Larson's name kept appearing at the center of it all, positioned as the original spark behind the speculation. Chris made it clear that the act crossed a line anyone rarely forgives: criticize his career, question his choices, but dragging his child into industry politics felt unforgivable. He had spent years shielding his family from the brutal machinery of fame, only to watch his daughter become collateral damage in a story she never asked to be part of.
She wants to be in more films and act more, and we just said maybe wait a few years.
The most painful part wasn't the rumor itself, but how easily it spread. The idea that his daughter lacked talent became a cruel talking point, repeated by people who had never seen her work, never met her, never understood the weight of growing up under a famous last name. Chris said it felt less like gossip and more like an attempt to humiliate him through the one place he was most vulnerable. As a result of that, he developed a lasting resentment rooted in protection against Larson, as his family is off limits. However, this next actor crossed yet another boundary that Chris can never forgive. Number 4, Robert Downey Jr.
So for me, when I get anxious and nervous and my brain goes to tell me, oh, this is that negative thing.
Robert Downey Jr. was someone Chris once admired deeply, not just for his talent, but for his survival story in an industry that rarely offers second chances. It was that same admiration that made what happened next feel even more painful. Chris had always managed his anxiety quietly. The gym was one of the few places where he felt grounded, where routine and physical focus kept his thoughts steady. It was known among a small circle that crowded spaces and sudden attention could trigger him, which made what unfolded there feel less like a mistake and more like a betrayal. According to people present that day, Robert walked into the gym mid-session and turned the space into a spectacle. He drew attention to Chris's routine, exaggerated his movements, and turned what should have been a private workout into a performance. As a result of that, the gym shifted from neutral to invasive in seconds. The situation escalated when Robert physically interrupted Chris's set, forcing him to stop while others watched. The interruption alone was humiliating, but the real damage came from the attention it drew. Chris froze. His breathing changed. The walls closed in as the gym became less a place of focus and more a stage he never agreed to stand on. Those who noticed saw the discomfort immediately. Chris's face tightened, his usual composure slipping as the attention refused to die down. What should have lasted a moment dragged on, leaving him exposed in front of strangers, colleagues, and cameras. For someone battling anxiety, it wasn't just embarrassing, it was destabilizing.
How the incredible amount of fear they had to manage, but it was like, which voice is louder?
Chris shared that he felt seen in the worst way possible, stripped of control by someone who knew better. From that point on, the dynamic changed. Admiration gave way to distance. Respect turned into restraint. Chris never publicly addressed the incident, but privately, it marked a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Speaking of addressing issues publicly, this next actor did to Chris what he wishes he had addressed publicly. Immediately, it happened. Number 3, Tom Hardy.
It was exhausting and there was a lot of fear and so on involved, but
according to industry whispers, Tom introduced Chris to what was described as a rare, time-sensitive investment opportunity. He framed it as something Hollywood insiders were quietly backing. a project too smart, too exclusive to fail. Tom spoke with confidence, the kind that doesn't sound rehearsed, but lived in. For Chris, it didn't feel like a pitch. It felt like advice from someone who had already walked the path. What followed unraveled fast. The promised returns never came. Timelines shifted. Explanations grew vague. Meetings turned into emails, and emails turned into silence. By the time the truth became unavoidable, the damage was already done. Chris had reportedly lost close to $15 million, money that disappeared into a venture that collapsed without warning. The loss hurt more because it wasn't just financial. Chris replayed every conversation, every reassurance, every moment where doubt was overridden by trust. In an industry where deception is common, he had believed this was different. He had believed Tom wouldn't steer him wrong.
I was able to do a bit more research and somewhat understand where I was headed, but it didn't take away the sort of fear and anxiety, particularly.
As the fallout settled, what haunted Chris most was the realization that the warning signs had been there, hidden beneath charisma and confidence. Whether the failure came from misjudgment or something darker didn't matter anymore. The result was the same. Trust was gone. From that point on, the relationship cooled into something distant and formal. But hatred doesn't just have to do with broken trust. Chris hated the next actor for a physical assault. Number 2, Quentin Tarantino.
And I slowly, honestly started to kind of lose my mind. And my wife.
What does that mean, lose your mind? What happened?
Like, just completely irrational. Everything is like overly sensitive to the most trivial sort of silly things.
Oh, really?
Quentin Tarantino was someone Chris viewed from a distance with reverence, a filmmaker whose name alone commanded rooms and shifted careers. Crossing paths with him at a major industry event felt symbolic, like standing near a force that shaped cinema itself. Chris didn't expect warmth, but he did expect basic respect. But the moment they met, Chris said that what happened made him lose his mind. In the middle of a crowded floor, as people jostled for space and attention, Quentin moved abruptly, his foot coming down hard on Chris's leg that it got fractured.
It can't be broken. I'll give an x-ray. Gives the x-ray and goes, oh my God, it's a really bad fracture through his femur.
It wasn't a brush or a graze. It was a full step, sharp, grounding, impossible to miss. Chris instinctively recoiled, pain flashing through his face as nearby heads turned toward the sudden disruption. What stunned him wasn't the impact. It was the reaction, or lack of one. Quentin didn't pause. Didn't look down, didn't acknowledge that he had just stepped on someone standing directly in front of him. He kept moving, laughing, talking, carrying on as though nothing had happened, as though Chris hadn't just flinched in plain sight. For Chris, the humiliation burned more than the pain. In a room full of witnesses, the message felt loud and clear. You weren't important enough to register. You weren't worth the courtesy of acknowledgement. The disregard felt intentional, sharpened by the fact that Quentin had glanced in his direction moments earlier. People around Chris noticed. Some looked uncomfortable, others looked away. No one intervened. The silence around the incident amplified it, turning a physical misstep into a symbolic one. Chris stood there, regaining his composure, realizing how power could erase accountability in seconds. That incident stayed with him, and from that moment on, Chris no longer saw Quentin Tarantino as just a visionary filmmaker, but as someone whose ego can step on people and keep walking as if nothing ever happened. And finally, this next actor did something quite disturbing to Chris. Number 1, Martin Scorsese.
Before I had been employed, acting was, I had this sort of dream to come to Hollywood and work there. And
from the very beginning, Chris felt an invisible wall where he expected at least professional courtesy. Their early interactions were characterized by distance. Where others were greeted with warmth or encouragement, Chris was met with indifference and, at times, thinly veiled impatience. The atmosphere made it clear he was not being welcomed as a peer, but observed as an outsider who hadn't earned his place in a certain cinematic hierarchy. What stung more was the criticism that followed. Chris became aware of comments circulating within industry spaces, dismissive assessments of his films, subtle jabs at his choices, and the familiar reduction of his work to spectacle rather than substance. Even when his projects performed well, the praise never came. Instead, there was an undercurrent of judgment that suggested his success was loud, but shallow. For Chris, this wasn't about disagreement or artistic difference. It was about tone. The attitude felt condescending, as though his path into Hollywood didn't align with the kind of prestige Scorsese respected. No effort was made to bridge the gap. No acknowledgement of the risks Chris took to expand beyond blockbuster roles. Just criticism without conversation. Over time, the message became unmistakable. He wasn't wanted in that space. And rather than chase validation that clearly wasn't coming, Chris made a decision quietly but firmly. He stopped aspiring to that collaboration. He stopped caring about approval from someone who had already decided who he was as an artist. Chris eventually swore he would never work with Martin Scorsese, out of spite, because if entering certain rooms meant shrinking himself to fit someone else's definition of legitimacy, then those rooms were never meant for him in the first place. Of course, putting Scorsese on his black list was unavoidable, just like the other 6 listed before him. Let's know your thoughts in the comments section. Subscribe to this channel for more videos like this, like and share.